Good day. My name is Ako Mututa. I'm the director of the Jegna Institute. And today I'm about to do an interview or have a conversation with Dr. Padma Venkatraman, who was born in Chennai, India, and who is in Trinidad to participate in activities related to World Book and Copyright Day. Dr. Venkatraman will be here to promote her newest book, which is called A Time to Dance. She'll also be participating in two activities related to World Book and Copyright Day, one in San Fernando in conjunction with the San Fernando Arts Council, and the other in Mayaro, where we'll be launching the Beach Pen Festival. Dr. Venkatraman, in the last few years, have emerged as one of the leading writers of Indian theme fiction. She is a scientist by training, having studied oceanography, and was at one time a professor of the science. However, she is now more known as a writer of fiction related to young adults. We are very happy to have Dr. Venkatraman here with us today, and I would like to begin by saying welcome to Trinidad, Dr. Padma Venkatraman.
Thank you, and thank you so much.
Dr. Venkatraman, you were born in Chennai, India. Could you please give us an idea what it was like growing up in Chennai, India?
There are several things that come to mind when I think about my early life, and I think related to what I'm doing now, two things stand out, and those are that when I was growing up, and I am a lot older than people think that I am, but when I was growing up in India, women and men were not treated the same way. They still are not. And when I was growing up, my family would not like me to say this, but girls and boys weren't treated the same way. And I think I grew up a little bit of a rebel in that sense, because what I did with my life, especially in terms of oceanography, doing oceanography, getting a PhD, it was not something that necessarily was assumed that I would be doing as a girl. So I think I did rebel quite a bit, and I learned to be independent, which was not necessarily something the culture fostered at the time, but at the same time I learned, I think, to do it in a respectful way, and that is very important to me. I see that even just being for a short while in Trinidad, I see that there is a certain respect, I think, that you grow up with in a society like this that is about respect for other people, I hope. And I think I did grow up respecting that. There's something else that I want to tell. I want to tell a little story. Can I tell a little story?
Yes, you can. Yes,
and
you may.
It's a story that came to my mind when you started talking to me. It's when I was about 7 years old, I think. I made one of the most important discoveries in my whole life, I think. And I was 7, and we have large families in India, at least we did. And I was in this room with lots of my cousins, and my aunt came from another state in India. She came down to visit, and she brought us all different presents. And my cousin and I, who are almost the same age, about 5 months apart, she gave my cousin a big box, and she gave me something very small. And in India, you're not supposed to open your gift, directly in front of the person who gave it to you, because to do that, it means you're showing too much evidence in your gift and not in the act of the person who gave it. So you're not respecting the act that they gave you something. You're too interested in the material thing. But of course, we were little children, so we said thank you. We didn't look at it, and then we ran into the other room and we tore everything apart. And already I was feeling very sad, because here's this woman, she is giving my cousin this big thing. She gave me something so small, and I opened it, and it was a book, and I looked at it, and it didn't even have any pretty pictures, no pictures. I was heartbroken, and I think when I came out of the room, my aunt saw what happened. So she took me aside and she said, your mother told me that you can read. That's why I brought you this book. And I was close to tears, but I didn't want to cry in front of all my other cousins. So I ran out onto the veranda and I opened that book. And I can tell you the way the light was falling that day. I can tell you the trees, a papaya tree, which you have here in Trinidad. I can see where it was, its leaves, how it was moving, the breeze, because I opened that book and halfway through that page, I discovered that in my head there were better pictures, with all due respect to every artist, than any artist could ever make, than any movie maker could make. They were in my head and the words had brought them to me. And that was one of the most important things I ever discovered in my life. And the second most important thing, also that day, when I was going back home, being driven back home, because I did have, a family of somewhat privilege when I was that young anyway. And I saw a little child, I cannot even tell if it was a girl or a boy, dressed in some rags, going through rubbish, maybe to eat something. And I remember thinking that that little child will never have a book. And I thought, somehow, when I grow up, I want to keep that in my mind and do what I can to help so that every child has that access, because every child should make that discovery of the power of the word, and not have to grapple in rubbish for food, not have to worry about things like that. So I think that was the second most important thing, second in time-wise, that I discovered that day. And those two things stayed with me all my life. They still are with me.
So, Dr. Venkatraman, you are saying that a book triggered off a response that has impacted on your life. Could you share any other experiences similarly to that one? I ask that question in the context of we live in a society now in which it is stated that children do not read, young people do not read. There is a belief that our young people are more impacted by multimedia. And as such, a book may not have the same effect it may have had on your life. Right? So I'm saying, can you share any other experience or any other stories of a similar nature that you have heard about, not necessarily in your life, but in any other person's life that you can recall?
You had pointed out that, in this day and age, we live in a very multimedia bombardment age, and children learn very young to look at the moving image, which of course is, I think, spectacular. We are all captivated by that to lesser or greater degrees. And you had brought up also the idea that maybe a book is now no longer as effective at capturing a child's attention, but I think it's a matter of how a book is written and how it is brought to a child. And I think, yes, to some degree, as parents, as educators, we need to be aware that we don't get children addicted to overstimulation, really, too much at a young age. I think it's important that they don't do that. But on the other hand, I think a well-written book, especially if it's well read, has the power to captivate. In my life, when I go to speak to schools, I often say, this is what I would like to do. What would you like me to do? Just so that, I'm on the same page with the teachers. Most of my books have multiple themes, different ways you can look at them. And if I only have an hour in a school or 2 hours, what aspect of it do you want me to speak about? But always I do a reading. And my first response for a long time from most schools is, no, I don't think it's going to be very effective. Maybe you skip that part. But that's not true. And I think to be able to read to a child effectively, to read to them in a beautiful way, is to show them that just those black and white words, print on paper, it's the most magical discovery human beings have made, to be able to write. And I can speak now, even after I die. If a child picks up my book, if an adult picks up my book, I will be talking to that person. It speaks across centuries. It speaks from one culture to another. My 3 novels, they're not all about the same culture, not all set in the same time. They're all different. But I think that aspect of a book, to be able to feel a certain empathy a compassion for the character that you are reading, that is so magical, that is so powerful. And I think that's not lost. So I don't know if I answered your question,
Yes,
but
you did. I couldn't agree with you more because I asked that question to provoke an answer. Because
Yes.
I share the view that if books are well written and are relevant to young people, they will respond to those books. That is my particular experience. However, in the education system, many believe that our young people are not reading. And our young people are not reading for a reason. Young people are gravitate to what is relevant to them, what is marketed to them. Unfortunately, if you want to respond to that, because I saw you just, if you want to respond to that, yes.
I think marketed to them is there because I see, and with all due respect, I have had a lot of luck and a lot of success and a lot of honors and all of that, for which I'm eternally grateful in the US on my, awards, etc., given to my books. I'm very happy about that. But I do see a lot of librarians, a lot of teachers who are younger, think the same thing. They think, oh, this book is too serious. So they give books to children which are fine, they are great to enjoy. But sometimes I think they cater a little bit to the lowest common denominator, and they pander to silly things, let's be sensational, let's have a sensational book that's full of fighting or, moving very fast and really nothing substantial. But I like to think that my books and people who write like me, who write books that are not, Island's End is very fast moving. Somebody said, one of the starred reviews it got said it was packed with action, which it is, but yet there is another thread in them, seriousness, which is of a different kind. And I think that ability, that authors who write like that, who are able to say, get into this character and live a different life, that is something that is of value. That's something I hope I'll always do. And that's something that I think you should be careful to also market that. Market that. That's my message to the world. Market books like this that have a literary quality to them, that are not just here, fly by night, gone tomorrow. And I think we pander a little too much to that.
I agree with you. One of the things that I have learned is that our institutions, particularly our media, we create what is called self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yes.
In that we determine or we decide, based on very limited information, that this or that may not apply to a particular sector of the society, or this group of people may not respond in a particular way. So we begin with that paradigm in our minds, and then we act out of that.
Right.
And I believe the response to publishing literary material comes from that subjective view. So I fully agree with you. And this is a conversation that you and I can expand for a very long time. But I want to move on to the next question.
Yes.
And the next question I want to ask you is, you started your career as a scientist. You are an oceanographer by training. Could you tell us, given the fact that we are island societies surrounded by water, your profession has much relevance to us. So I would like you to talk about that for a moment, please.
Certainly.
Yes.
I mean, island societies, but also societies everywhere, I think, in the entire world, need to be very conscious, especially today, given all that is going on with the environment and all that we have done to damage the environment. It's extremely important, I think, for everybody to understand that we live in a very fragile world. We live in sort of a bubble. I mean, our planet is the only one that has given us such a gift of water, which anybody living on the islands would know, and life. And we have treated it very, very poorly over the generations. The future people are going to suffer, and in my mind, and not it's in everything that I have read as a scientist, it's clear to me that human beings have altered this planet's environment, and they need to make changes in what they do and how they live. And I think that's very important. I think the reason that the environment is the way it is today is we've become a little too selfish, all of us, that includes me, I'm sure, but to make at least a few changes in our lifestyles is so important. We think that we are going to be so much happier when we get that next fabulous looking car that burns up tons of gasoline. And I don't think happiness is about that. And I think we confuse materialism a little too much. And we have become, I'm not a person, I'm not a sage myself. I'm not living in an isolated society, in an isolated way without having any impact on the environment. I do that. I do things also to the environment that are not right. But at least be aware of how much we do and minimize it as much as you can. And that means making some sacrifices in the way we live. And I think we have to do that, not buy into this model of constant, extreme consumerism, especially where it impinges on the environment. That's, I am not telling everybody again, I'm not saying you should live like an ascetic, but to cut back a little bit at least, because we have changed the environment partly because of that mindset.
And that brings us to your book, Islands End.
Yeah.
I know this has been influenced by your work
Yes.
as a scientist, as an oceanographer. Could you tell us a bit more of what inspired Islands End?
Sure. When I was an oceanographer, I actually worked on the Andaman Islands. This is not a picture of the Andaman Islands, but it is, well, a fictional picture of an island, which is part of that chain. And they're very remote. They're off the coast of India, actually more off the coast of Thailand. But anyway, they belong to India for historical reasons. And when I was an oceanographer, I did several cruises. And one of the times that I was back in India working as an oceanographer, I lived on these islands for some time. And it was a very important time for me in my life, because when I went back, I admit I was a little, thought I was so fantastic. I was a hotshot scientist returned from America. Haha, I knew so many things. I was going to teach these people. And there are different races on the islands. There are people who have been there for a long time of African ancestry. And there are people who of my heritage, so people of Indian ancestry. And I was shocked, utterly shocked, when I went to the islands to see that Indians of my ancestry who had actually experienced so recently British racism towards them, because they had, or we had darker skin, went to the islands and treat the people of the islands with a similar kind of racism. And it upset me a lot to see that, but that taught me a lot. I think it was quite, when I was quite young, so it showed me very clearly that although I'm proud of the culture that I come from, I'm proud of the heritage that I have, I also know that it is flawed, as I'm sure every culture is flawed in some way, but it was a good thing for me to learn that. It was very good for me to learn that young, in that fundamental way, that it is not as though my culture is perfect. And while we might say that very easily, it was good for me to see this badness in the society that looked like me. That was one thing that I learned. The other thing was, as I said, I went there a little bit with a big head, and I came back with a little shrunken head, I think, and it was a good shrinking, because I thought I was so great, I was going to teach these people so much, the people that were, I was living next to. But I lived next to a tribe who has had very minimal contact with human civilization. I was not an anthropologist. I did not, study them or live all the time with them or anything like this. But I lived next to them, close enough in proximity to even that passing experience that I had showed me their worldview is very different, very unscientific, and yet very valid. And I understood fundamentally that a completely different paradigm of living, a completely different way to think about things had as much validity as mine did. And I think that was a good thing, because we all talk, at least I hope we all talk, about how people are all equal, whatever religion, whatever race, etc., we mouth these things. But I think to learn that through experience early in life, that was good for me. And at some level, I like to think, I hope, that because not everybody can go to the islands, not the islands where I was, not everybody can come to Trinidad, I hope to bring that to people who read my books. I hope that if you read my book and you live the life of a different person
Yes.
for that short time,
Yes.
that you'll be different.
It's interesting. I